March 1942, North Atlantic, 58 degrees north, 23 degrees west. The convoy moved in columns through water the color of slate, 43 merchant vessels, loaded with grain, steel, and aviation fuel, stretched across 5 miles of open ocean. Above them, clouds hung low and grey. Below them, something waited. Lieutenant Commander Harold Brennan stood on the bridge of HMS Starling, a Flower-class corvette assigned to escort Group B7. His face was unshaven. His eyes were red. He had not slept more than 3 hours in the past 2 days. None of them had. The Atlantic was killing them, not quickly, not cleanly, one ship at a time. In the past 6 weeks, Brennan's convoy had lost 9 vessels, 9 explosions in the dark, 9 columns of flame against a night sky, 9 sets of men swallowed by the freezing water, their voices fading into the wind before rescue could arrive. U-boats. German submarines operated in coordinated groups the Allies called wolf packs. They struck at night, submerged by day, and used the vastness of the ocean to vanish before counterattack. Allied escort ships carried depth charges, but dropping them required knowing where the enemy was. And in the Atlantic, sound traveled through water in strange, bending paths. Sonar returns echoed off thermal layers, off schools of fish, off nothing at all. The corvettes chased ghosts. Brennan watched the convoy through binoculars. The merchant ships steamed at 8 knots, their hulls heavy with cargo, too slow to outrun a surfaced U-boat, too numerous to protect individually. The escorts circled them like sheepdogs, scanning the horizon, listening for the telltale whine of a diesel engine or the metallic ping of a sonar return. But the ocean was vast, and the wolf packs were patient. At 0342 hours, the night turned white. A torpedo struck the starboard side of SS Kellerton, a British freighter carrying 12,000 tons of wheat. The explosion tore through her hull below the waterline. Flame erupted from the cargo holds, and within seconds the ship began to list. Men poured onto the deck, scrambling for lifeboats. Some jumped into the water without waiting. The temperature was 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Brennan ordered full speed. Starling cut through the swells toward the burning freighter, but even as they closed the distance, he knew what would happen next. The U-boat had already turned away. It would dive, reload, and wait for the escorts to cluster around the sinking ship. Then it would strike again. This was the pattern. This was how they died. Kellerton sank in 11 minutes. 17 men were pulled from the water. 34 were lost. Brennan stood on the bridge and watched the oil burn on the surface long after the hull disappeared. His hands gripped the rail until his knuckles turned white. Around him, the convoy reformed and continued west. There was no time to stop, no time to mourn. The schedule demanded forward motion, and the wolf packs demanded blood. The Royal Navy was losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and no one knew how to stop it. London, Admiralty House, Western Approaches Command. In a windowless room beneath the streets of Liverpool, officers tracked the carnage with coloured pins on a massive wall map. Each pin represented a ship. Each day, more pins were removed. The numbers were brutal. In January 1942, German U-boats sank 62 Allied vessels. In February, 85. In March, the total climbed to 95. By April, the projection exceeded 120. At this rate, Britain would be starved into surrender before the year ended. Convoys carried food, fuel, ammunition, and aircraft. Without them, the war effort collapsed. The Admiralty had tried everything. They increased the number of escorts. They rerouted convoys into northern waters where ice and fog made hunting harder. They organized air patrols from Iceland and Newfoundland. None of it worked. The U-boats adapted faster than the Allies could respond. They operated in groups of 8 to 12 submarines, coordinating attacks by radio, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. The Wolfpack tactic was devastatingly simple. One U-boat would shadow a convoy and report its position. Others would converge. They attacked at night, when visibility was lowest and sonar was least reliable. After firing torpedoes, they would dive and scatter, leaving the escorts to search empty water while the pack regrouped and struck again. Depth charges were effective only if dropped directly above a submerged submarine. But sonar could not track a moving U-boat with enough precision to guarantee a kill. The escorts dropped charges where they thought the enemy might be, hoping for a lucky hit. Most of the time they found nothing. The Germans called it tonnage war: sink more ships than the Allies could build, destroy more cargo than the convoys could deliver, force Britain to negotiate or collapse. And they were winning. In the spring of 1942, a small team of scientists and naval officers gathered at the Admiralty Research Laboratory in Teddington, outside London. Their task was to solve the unsolvable: how to locate and destroy submerged U-boats before they could escape. Among them was a civilian physicist named Dr. Edward Collingwood. He was 41 years old, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of chewing the end of his pencil when he thought. Before the war, he had worked on acoustic theory at Cambridge. Now, he studied the properties of underwater sound. Collingwood understood the problem better than most. Sonar worked by sending a pulse of sound into the water and listening for the echo. If the pulse struck a submarine, the echo returned, and the sonar operator could estimate distance and bearing. But water was not uniform. Temperature, salinity, and pressure created layers where sound bent or reflected. A U-boat hiding beneath a thermal layer could be invisible to sonar, even at close range. Worse, sonar was directional. It listened in a narrow cone. A U-boat outside that cone remained undetected. The escorts were hunting blind. Collingwood proposed something different. Instead of listening for submarines, what if they could make the submarines reveal themselves? He called it active acoustic deception. The idea was radical. Instead of waiting for a U-boat to attack, the escorts would broadcast sounds that mimicked the noises of a convoy: engines, propellers, hull vibrations. The U-boat, believing it had found a target, would move into position to attack. And when it did, it would expose itself. The Admiralty was skeptical. Submariners were not fools. They listened carefully before attacking. They analyzed engine signatures, counted propeller blades, measured the rhythm of a convoy's formation. A crude recording would not deceive them. Collingwood agreed. It had to be perfect. Teddington, Admiralty Research Laboratory, June 1942. The workshop smelled of machine oil and salt water. Collingwood stood in front of a steel tank the size of a small car, filled with seawater pumped in from the Thames estuary. Inside the tank, a microphone hung suspended on a wire frame. Nearby, a gramophone sat on a workbench, its horn aimed at the water. Collingwood was trying to teach a machine to lie. He had spent the past month recording sounds, not music or speech, but the mechanical rhythms of ships at sea. He had visited dockyards in Portsmouth and Glasgow, placing microphones near propellers, engines and hull plates. He recorded the throb of diesel engines at cruising speed, the high whine of turbines under load, the rhythmic chop of a four-bladed screw cutting through water. Each ship had a signature, a fingerprint made of sound. The challenge was not recording the noises. The challenge was playing them back in a way that would deceive a trained hydrophone operator aboard a U-boat. The recordings had to account for distance, depth, and the distortion caused by water itself. A sound that seemed real in open air might sound artificial underwater. Collingwood tested variations. He adjusted playback speed. He layered multiple recordings to simulate a convoy's overlapping engine noise. He added irregularities, the slight variations in RPM that occurred when a ship rode heavy swells or adjusted course. It had to sound alive. By mid-June, he had a prototype, a waterproof speaker housed in a steel canister, powered by a battery pack. capable of broadcasting pre-recorded sounds at ranges up to 2 miles. The device could be lowered from a ship on a cable and towed at depth, creating the acoustic illusion of a target where none existed. He called it the Sound Decoy Unit, or SDU. The Admiralty authorized a field test. On June 24, 1942, Collingwood boarded HMS Loosestrife, a Flower-class corvette operating out of Liverpool. The crew regarded him with suspicion. He was a civilian, pale and thin, wearing a wool coat too heavy for summer. He carried a wooden crate containing the SDU and a satchel full of notes. The captain, Lieutenant James Harding, was blunt. "This thing of yours better not get my men killed." Collingwood nodded. He understood. Every experiment at sea carried risk. If the device failed, or worse, if it attracted U-boats without the ability to destroy them, the corvette would become the target. But if it worked, it might change the war. Loosestrife steamed north into the Atlantic, joining convoy HX-193, a group of 37 merchant ships bound for Britain from Halifax. The convoy moved in columns, flanked by 6 escorts. The weather was rough. Waves broke over the bow, and the deck pitched hard enough that Collingwood had to grip the rail to stay upright. He did not complain. On the second night, at 23:15 hours, the convoy detected a hydrophone contact, a U-boat, possibly 2, shadowing from the south. The escorts moved to investigate, but the contacts faded before depth charges could be dropped. Collingwood requested permission to deploy the SDU. Harding hesitated. Then he nodded. The device was lowered into the water on a steel cable, trailing 200 yards behind Loosestrife. Collingwood activated the playback mechanism. Through the ship's hydrophones, the crew could hear it. The low throb of diesel engines, the rhythmic chop of propellers. It sounded like a merchant ship, heavy and slow, separated from the convoy. An easy target. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then, at 0:17 hours, sonar detected movement. A submerged contact, closing from the east. Range, 1,800 yards. Speed, 4 knots. The U-boat was approaching the decoy. Harding ordered the crew to battle stations. The corvette turned hard to port, positioning itself between the U-boat and the decoy. Depth charges were readied. The sonar operator tracked the contact, calling out bearings in a calm, measured voice. 1,500 yards, 1,200 yards. The U-boat was hunting. At 900 yards, Harding gave the order. Loosestrife surged forward, dropping a pattern of 6 depth charges in a wide arc. The charges sank, their fuses set to detonate at 150 feet. The crew braced. The explosions lifted the stern of the corvette out of the water. Columns of white spray erupted behind them, glowing faintly in the darkness. The sonar operator listened, headphones pressed tight against his ears. Contact lost. They circled the area for 30 minutes, searching for debris or oil slicks. They found nothing conclusive. The U-boat had either been damaged and fled or escaped intact, but the principle was proven. The Sound Decoy Unit had drawn the submarine into range. August 1942. North Atlantic, convoy SC-97. The Wolfpacks were growing bolder. In late summer, German Naval Command increased U-boat deployments across the Atlantic. They operated in groups of 15, sometimes 20, coordinating attacks that lasted for days. Convoys sailed through corridors of submarines, losing ships faster than escorts could respond. But the Allies were adapting. By August, 12 corvettes and destroyers had been equipped with sound decoy units. The devices were deployed at night, when Wolfpacks were most active. The tactics evolved quickly. Escorts would position decoys at the edges of a convoy, creating false targets that drew U-boats into ambush zones. Other escorts, running silent, would wait nearby with depth charges armed. It worked. On August 12th, HMS Clematis used a decoy to lure U-176 into a kill zone. The corvette dropped 14 depth charges and debris surfaced minutes later. Shattered wood, clothing, and a life preserver marked with the U-boat's designation. All hands lost. On August 19th, HMS Vervan destroyed U-335 using the same tactic. The submarine had approached what it believed was a straggling freighter. Instead, it sailed into a coordinated attack by 3 escorts. Depth charges shattered the pressure hull. There were no survivors. The U-boat command noticed. German naval intelligence began receiving reports from surviving crews. Submariners described hearing ships where visual reconnaissance found nothing. They reported engine signatures that moved independently of visible convoys. Some believed the Allies had developed new detection technology. Others suspected deception. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, issued a directive in September 1942. All Wolfpack commanders were instructed to verify targets visually before attacking. They were to ignore hydrophone contacts unless confirmed by periscope observation. The Allies adapted again. Decoys were deployed in pairs, creating overlapping soundscapes that suggested multiple ships. Escorts used the devices to mask their own movements, allowing them to close on U-boats without being detected. The British developed new recordings, the sounds of damaged ships, of convoys in distress, of vessels slowing for rescue operations. Each sound was carefully designed to provoke a response. The battle became psychological. U-boat commanders grew cautious. They hesitated before attacking, spending more time on reconnaissance, burning fuel and time. This made them predictable. Escort groups learned to anticipate their behavior, positioning decoys and depth charge patterns where the submarines were most likely to appear. By November 1942, the kill rate had shifted. Allied escorts were sinking more U-boats than they lost merchant ships. The Wolfpacks, once hunters, were now the hunted. Convoys crossed the Atlantic with fewer losses. Supplies reached Britain in greater quantities. The stranglehold on the convoy routes began to loosen. In December 1942, Dönitz withdrew 3 Wolfpacks from the Central Atlantic and repositioned them near Gibraltar, where the Allies had fewer escorts. But even there, sound decoy units followed. The Mediterranean convoys adopted the same tactics. The U-boats found no safe water. Collingwood's invention had turned the tide, not through firepower, not through speed or armor, but through the simplest, oldest form of warfare, deception. The Allies had taught the ocean to lie, and the submarines, blind in the dark water, believed it. London, January 1943. The war did not pause for recognition. By the time the Admiralty compiled its official report on acoustic deception tactics, the Battle of the Atlantic had entered a new phase. The sound decoy units were now standard equipment on escort vessels. Training programs taught hydrophone operators to distinguish between real and simulated targets. Engineers refined the recordings, adding environmental variables like wind noise, wave interference, and the acoustic shadows cast by icebergs. The devices saved lives. Between June 1942 and December 1942, convoys equipped with SDUs lost 43% fewer ships than unequipped groups. Escort groups using decoy tactics sank 37 confirmed U-boats during the same period. The devices did not win the war alone, but they bought time. Time for shipyards to build more escorts. Time for aircraft to extend patrol ranges. Time for convoy tactics to evolve. Collingwood never returned to Cambridge. He spent the rest of the war working for the Admiralty, developing refinements to the SDU and consulting on other acoustic projects. He received no public commendation. His name appeared in no newspapers. The work was classified, and it remained classified for decades after the war ended. But the sailors knew. In the wardrooms of corvettes and destroyers, officers spoke of the ghost ships that drew the Wolfpacks into ambush. Among crews, the sound decoy units were called shadow callers, or simply the trick. They became part of the unwritten law of the convoy war. passed from one watch to the next, spoken of in the same breath as radar and sonar. The official tally was never precise. Estimates suggest that sound decoy units contributed to the sinking of at least 63 German U-boats and saved more than 1,000 merchant vessels from torpedo attack. The devices remained in use until the end of the war, evolving alongside advances in sonar and anti-submarine tactics. After the war, the technology was declassified and adapted for civilian use. Commercial fishing fleets used acoustic decoys to herd schools of fish. Naval forces around the world studied the British designs and developed their own versions. The principles Collingwood established became foundational to modern underwater warfare. He died in 1957 in a quiet suburb outside London. His obituary in the Times mentioned his work at Cambridge, but made no reference to the war. His family donated his papers to the Imperial War Museum, where they remained largely unexamined until the 1980s, when historians began compiling comprehensive records of the Atlantic campaign. In those papers, among equations and acoustic diagrams, was a single handwritten note, dated June 1942. It read, "The ocean does not care who wins, but if we can teach it to speak, perhaps it will speak for us." The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous military campaign of the Second World War. It lasted from 1939 to 1945 and claimed the lives of more than 100,000 sailors, soldiers and civilians. It was fought in darkness, in storms, in freezing water far from land. It was fought with depth charges and torpedoes, with courage and exhaustion, with invention and desperation. And for a brief, crucial period, it was fought with sound, not the roar of guns or the scream of aircraft, but the quiet, persistent hum of engines that were never there. A lie told in steel and water, a trick played on an enemy who had learned to trust the ocean's voice. It worked, and it saved 1,000 ships.